Good morning, everybody. Before the day starts properly, I just wanted to get a video and catch up, because I missed one on Monday because I'd been away for the day, and yesterday was a catch up on everything I'd missed on Monday. So today's the first opportunity this week that I've been able to make a video. Hang on, the car coming. There you go. Alright then. Well, there were, like I said in the last video, I wanted to show you a few little surprises that I've discovered this week in the garden in the front, but since then a few surprises have popped up in the back as well, so I'll show you them in a minute. But before I do, I just wanted to show how the garden is holding up in this drought. Okay, things are still growing. I've chopped back the mallow at the back there in the foxgloves that have gone over. Okay, how things are holding up in the drought. Still green, still lush. The roses are still flowering beautifully. The pot is surviving because I've been watering that every day, because the pots with the things that are essential that I want to keep, those I water, especially the ones with the tomatoes, the squashes, the beans, things like that, because they are in pots really, and I want to keep them going. They're food, so they're a priority. But in the front, it's traffic, I've left this a bit late. In the front, as you can see, the kale are surviving very well. Even the chamomile, the lavender doesn't mind, it's a Mediterranean plant anyway. The aronia berries are starting to ripen. The sweet peas are finally starting to climb, and they're surviving all right, because there's quite deep compost there in the side of the path there. And I have been, until over a week ago, once a week I was watering with a hose pipe, no nozzle on, just the hose pipe, and watering directly at roots, but giving everything a proper drench once a week. But I've stopped doing that now, and I'm using the watering cans. And I used to do a proper water with watering cans, to the total of about 16 watering cans for the front garden to give a proper water. And I've got it down to 12 now, watering directly at the roots of the plants, and I'm now going to lower that to about 10 by watering only the most essential that I want to keep alive, because they have a purpose and I don't want them to die. It's literally a case now of just keeping things alive, and whatever survives, survives, and what doesn't. We have had bouts of rain that lasted for about 5 minutes at the most, about 3 times in the last 2 weeks. That's all we've had. So even though we've had rain, there's nowhere near enough to water all the plants. But things are surviving. Look, the blackberries, look at that. And they're beautiful, and they're lovely big berries as well. Look at that, gorgeous. So I'll be harvesting as well, and it's nice to be able to harvest even in a drought, because a lot of people don't have that luxury, because it is the luxury at the moment. Actually, the self-heal has gone over, needs a hair trim. Lady's bed straw clinging on there. I'm going to have to move that aquilegia out the way. It's going to drown it out. This is one of the surprises. Look at that. The passion flower coming back. And it had died with the snow we had at the beginning of the year. And nothing happened in the spring. We thought, okay, that's it, that's done. And I left it up here specifically because the birds were pulling at it for nesting. And I thought, well, I'll leave it there then. It's giving a purpose to something in nature. The birds are getting nesting materials out of it. And then just a week ago, I spotted the passion flower coming back. The primroses are still suffering from all the wood chips, bark chippings, sucking all the nitrates out of the soil. But hopefully they'll come back. I'll just chop it back, and hopefully the new leaves will come through in the winter. Lorry. The Achillea, cloth of gold, still beautiful. The smell is still nice and strong. I'm so pleased this year that the wisteria has survived in that corner, and is starting to climb, and I'm really happy about that. The calendula, I keep cutting back for new flowers to come, but I'll soon have to leave the last flowers and gather what I can, and then just chop and drop and more, because that's all I do is chop and drop. I also chopped and dropped the Nepalese cabbage that was here, and I've left all the seed heads. I've taken what I needed and left all the others right here, because the stalks will protect the ground from too much evaporation. And if you can see over there are some seedlings from it already coming up. So if they survive, then there'll be more Nepalese cabbage through the winter, and I can just chop and drop that for more soil. But it'll feed the birds. The birds love the seeds, and they keep coming down. So at least they'll have food still for a while, as long as there's seeds left there to look for. The buddleia has started flowering. Not so pretty though, it's struggling. Look at that, a lot of brown bits on it. Doesn't stay white for very long, not very lush plumes. The Oleagna still hanging on fine. I've put in a couple of little dwarf sunflowers because we want to keep seed for them, because we miss having sunflowers. The passers-by love seeing sunflowers, but we used to have the giant multi-headed ones that cross-pollinated at the allotment. And the passers-by used to love stopping and taking photographs of the big multi-headed giant sunflowers. So we'll start again. These are a short one, but people like to sit and watch, look at the garden as they go by. The rose is still hanging on. That needs a feed, actually. I think that's one of the reasons it's not so strongly scented anymore. The jasmine came back again in the spring, as I've said, and it's climbing nicely. Hopefully, as the garden gets more shelter growing across the front and that side, they'll survive the winter a bit better. There's a callaloo. Right. And the other surprise, so the one surprise was the passion flower that came back, and there is the other. We thought we'd lost all our dahlias because they all seem to have died. And suddenly last week that one started coming back. So that's a nice surprise out the front. Good morning. So let's go through to the back now. Okay, let's go through to the back. Right, now, two of the surprises I found in the back garden. One that I did not plant, but somehow has come up by some strange miracle, is Cape gooseberries. Where that has come from, I have absolutely no idea, but it's there, and I've left it there. I'll gather seeds and well, obviously it's a perennial. I must have had some somewhere. I must have self-seeded. Another surprise we found in the back garden is right here. Can you see that hole just there? That is an entrance for a bumblebee nest. And this little bits of gravel you see there is the bees that have pulled all the dirt out to make a nest in there. And I am so happy that they have found a safe place to nest. So I've stopped watering that one. I might have to sacrifice. I've only poured a tiny bit of water down the edge of the pot that side just to keep it moist. But yeah, I'll be careful of this area not to disturb them. And the bumblebee that went in there, as I saw it, is one of the very big bumblebees with a bright orangey brown bottoms. So that was a beautiful, happy surprise to find that in the garden. Really happy with that. Things are surviving, and even the marshmallow in the pots and the tray, I've been watering them daily just when they get dry, but they're surviving. So I'm happy with that. The strawberries are surviving, not putting out fruit, because I think lots of things are just trying to conserve energy than put out a lot of fruit. The Chilean guavas are starting to set. Oh, wow, that was one fruit. It's drying up. Looks like they're also struggling then. Oh, there's one right there. Chilean guava. It's related to blueberries, so let's hope they survive. Yeah, the blueberries I'm not been harvesting, and suddenly the birds have discovered them. So I'd better harvest nope, there's nothing left. Nothing left on the blueberries, except for one. That's mine now. Gone. And that's basically what we're doing, foraging. Yeah, the nasturtiums in the pots on the shed are surviving. So the strawberries, but the tomatoes, even though it's got fruit, nah, it's got to come out. I'll just put the lobelia there. We do finally have some lovely tomatoes growing in there. I mean, there are people who've already had harvests of tomatoes. Can you believe that? Okay. Buddleia are growing nicely in the back. Came from the same packet of seeds as the one in the front. Can you believe it? There you are. The pond's surviving, but it needs the pump. Mosquitoes absolutely everywhere. I will be getting fish this week and a pump. So hopefully it'll sort that all out. The pool water, I'm going to have to put all in the water butts and take the pool down because we're not filling it anymore because of the drought. And even though I haven't actually heard of any hosepipe bans in Cardiff, I'm trying not to use it at all. So I'm just using watering cans and filling watering cans. So this is starting to go down. I can't fill it, so I might as well just empty everything into the water butts and get rid of the pond from the the pool from the garden. I don't think we're going to be using it again anytime soon because we don't have a pump for it, and it's just no good. You have to have a pump for a little pool like this. So yeah, that's going to go this week. I have to turn the compost, empty this out into the water butts. Yeah, these tomatoes, and then I can move these pots actually back against the hedge there when the pool is gone, because it was stopping the pool going over and rolling with the slope. So I can move that now, and then the yacon can get more sunshine and the tomatoes can go back against the shed there. Sweet potatoes doing okay. They seem to be a little bit sensitive to not having enough water. This bed I have actually made little holes behind the plant, so it's at the top of the slope rather, because if I water the soil when it's dry, it just runs off. So I made a tiny little hole about that deep, and I pour with a small watering can the water into the hole, and it seeps down to the roots. So the plants are getting water lower down with just a tiny bit of water, and they're getting more. Unfortunately, the slugs are out again because the nights are cooler and the slugs are out. And I'm only watering in the morning. So, but somehow the slugs have become resilient to the dry weather. But it's cooler at night, so they are out more. You can see the holes I've made there to water. But things are surviving. The patty pans seem to be still flowering, and there are still a few coming off it, but it doesn't seem to be like in the spot. It's a bit too shady. I might have to move it back into the greenhouse frame. But I didn't want to move it too close because there's the courgettes over there and they're still cross-pollinating. The corn is forming fruit now. We had quite a bit of wind the other day. I think it was Saturday or Sunday. As you can see, there's lots of fruit forming there. And so hopefully the wind had blown enough of the pollen onto them. But I have been, as I said the other day, just taking some of the anthers and dropping them on the stigmas like that. So they're surviving. That tomato's in too much of shade. I did want to talk also a bit more about the water situation, because at the moment everybody's talking about it. We can't escape it. We've had a very long summer so far. I'm not complaining. I love the summer because I'm getting more stuff growing and I'm getting to spend more time with my family, doing something to create some memories for, the winter. But I have been thinking a lot about this. Everybody's talking about it, and yet we have had a number of years so far where we have had long dry spells. This is the worst for a long time, but it is something we've been told to look out for. It will be happening. It is something we need to adapt to. And I think that we've had plenty of warning already, because it's been spoken about for years that we're going to have hotter, longer summers and colder, wetter winters, more flooding and more extremes. And so we have had a few years at least to start preparing for this, but we've always been, in the whole and in the general, people have been treating the forecasters of those situations as extremists and head in the clouds kind of things. But so we've had warning, and just watching the news recently, and I don't watch the news often, I'm too busy to sit watching telly, but I sat down and watched the news for a little bit. What was I watching? It was before going an evening once when I finally sat down, and they were talking about the farmers struggling with no water supply, and that crops are less voluminous as it usually is. In particular, one carrot farmer, and behind him was a humongous field full of carrot plants, and he lifted a bunch that he said were smaller than usual, and in my opinion they looked like really good looking carrots. They were fine, but they weren't what was expected by the retailers and what their presumption of what the public want, that they get more, the bigger vegetables. But so it wasn't exactly what they wanted, but because of the drought they're struggling. And I was thinking, it's not just because of the drought, He had one humongous great big field of monoculture crops, just carrots, with some low hedges, no trees in the hedges, just the low hedges as the boundaries for the field. And I'm thinking, how are we still, in this day and age, using traditional farming methods that are obviously not working anymore? We're not adapting with nature. We're not adapting with changes, whether we've brought it on or whether nature brings it on in cycles or whatever the case may be. We are not adapting. We are not resilient. We are stuck in our rigid attitudes of farming and agriculture. There are plenty of examples for our farmers if they would just be willing to look, because they're going in for intensive farming, mega farming, it's going to fail. If they look at smaller models that are diversifying, they will see plenty of examples of resilience surviving all these extremes that was being thrown at us. But they don't want to do it because it goes against the brainwashed norm, against the staunch traditions. So problems ahead if we do not, make ourselves a bit more flexible to become resilient. If we're going to kick against the changes, we will buckle. There's only so long we can be rigid in negative things, and we pay the price. So I was thinking as well about farmers. I remember from when growing up in South Africa, and there are countries all over the world where, especially in the southern hemisphere, who do not have as much rainfall as the northern hemisphere. and they still farm. Okay, some of them still the normal monoculture stuff, but where there are livestock farming, they generally, some of them have man-made, we call them dams, but they're more like ponds, great big concrete vats that are about 5 foot deep. And we used to call them dams, but they were more like man-made ponds above the ground, and we used to swim in them as children, and some farmers kept fish in them, and that would irrigate their land as well, so fertilizer and water for the land. Some farmers used it to water their animals, so the great big troughs. Some built canals, concrete canals through their land. Okay, there's a better way, we know, of doing that, where it could stay in the ground if we just make it in places like that, if it's appropriate, swales, because they're not appropriate in all situations, but contours on the land, trees and ridges and banks to hold the water in the land. Create shade by trees in the hedges so that there's a bit more shade for the land and where the trees hold the water, so that there's more, there's a lot to do. I can't talk about it all in one. I mean, anybody could just look up permaculture farming. There's quite a few permaculture farms in the UK, and they have animals and they have crops, and they are doing okay because they're doing it with principles that adapt for the conditions. So there's a lot we can do. But I am not a farmer. I don't live in big fields, and I don't have to provide crops for the nation. I am in a suburb, in a council house, and I am trying to do what I can to grow my own. Because of all these failures that are going on with crops, we look to have price rises in the cost of food and all sorts of things. Even feed for the farmers' animals are starting to be extortionate. There's just not enough feed around for them, and they're dipping into their winter feed already. So there are problems ahead, but in permaculture we try to find solutions to problems, and we try to find a positive way forward. So even though we can't do a great deal about this year, what's happened, we can still try to prepare for price hikes and things ahead. There are still crops that can be planted for winter food in our gardens. Charles Dowding has a great book out, Growing Winter Crops, so you can look for Charles Dowding, and there's a lot of information there about growing stuff for the winter. Of course, some of them we have to start earlier on in the year for them to be able to fruit and produce through the winter. But there are still stuff that we could plant now that will give us some through most of the winter, and then in the early spring, where there's usually nothing between the winter and the summer harvests. So you can still put stuff in the ground ready for winter, but we have to learn to eat seasonal. We can't have our staples every day of the year that we're used to having. We have to learn to eat seasonal. We have to learn to grow more resilient plants, and to change our diets to things that are far more varied, so that if something fails, we still have something else to eat, and it's not going to be too much of a shock to us. Because a lot of this stuff, some of the stuff I grow, most people wouldn't even touch. They have very limited palate because they have a limited amount of foods that they will eat. Now, I'm aware that I'm 24 minutes on this video already, and it'll take a long time to upload, and most people probably switch off by now. But if you have a garden and you've got plants, be willing to sacrifice the least important things. Water only the most important things to you. Water at the roots without a rose, so that the roots can get the water deep down and exactly where it's needed. Mulch, mulch, mulch with newspaper, compost, wood chippings. But of course the wood chips should be at least a year old before they go on the soil, because like in my front garden, they start to suck the nitrates out of the soil before they start to release them again. So at least a year old wood chips, plenty of compost, shredded paper, whatever, but mulch, mulch, mulch. water first thing early in the morning, not during the day, and don't bother in the evenings, because even in the summer the slugs are out if you water in the evening. So early morning proper water at the roots. Focus on the most important things. Long term, try and get some perennials in strategic places to create a little bit of shade to protect your garden from too much sunshine to evaporate all that water. Because as I've shown in the front garden, even though I have watered at the roots properly, because there's not a lot of shelter on the front and side of the garden, the heat still wilts the plants. So keep an eye on that. You need shade, and it's never too late to plant some shrubs and bushes to create a little bit of shade to protect the soil. So that's all I wanted to talk about today. I'll speak to you soon again as a catch up. This is what happens if I miss 2 days of making a video. Anyway, have a lovely day. It's bound to be hot again for the rest of the week. Not much outlook for rain, and it's going to be at least another 2 weeks of sunny summer. So enjoy it, make the most of it. Bye bye.